Hello and welcome to 2021. 2020 was certainly quite a year, and we can only hope that 2021 is both a little more interesting in terms of being able to be out and about more, but also a little less interesting in terms of world affairs and so on. I'm not here to talk about all of that. I'm here to focus really on where software development is going and what kinds of things we might expect across the spectrum of what we're seeing in development across big and smaller organisations this year. First, I'll put a caveat out there. As analysts, we do have a tendency to think everything is going to be changing really fast. So transformation and all those cool buzzy terms like everything's going to be rapidly moving into certain new areas. But equally, we know that organisations can move fast and slow. So there are certain areas that are going to be moving more quickly and certain areas that are going to stay pretty much the same over the year or just be a slow burn. So I'll take each of these predictions, if I may, as with that caveat that we're not expecting any big bangs, but we are expecting certain progress and trends. First, we're seeing an awful lot around what we can loosely call distributed architectures. So here we're thinking about microservices, we're thinking about containers, Docker, we're thinking about serverless architectures, functions as a service. We're thinking the Kubernetes for orchestration of microservices and containers. And we did some research last year, and what's very clear is that this is not a massive explosion and a big change in everything that everyone's doing. But when we looked at, for example, we surveyed over 1,000 organizations, and we found that 3 in 10 actually have some kind of Kubernetes-based application deployed, running outside pilots and into actual delivery. So yes, these things are really happening across organizations, and we expect to see that grow. We're certainly seeing a great deal of interest in how they may bring benefits. Interestingly, and going back to the research again, it doesn't have to be all new build. Organizations are seeing microservices, for example, as a way of building better, more scalable front ends onto existing applications and legacy data stores. So from the point of view of driving development, certainly we're likely to see more and more emphasis on distributed architectures, but equally we're seeing that as a way of harnessing existing capabilities. And that, of course, is going to drive pipelines and tool chains and how we think about that, because the more that we've got a fixed target that we're aiming for, that we're developing towards, the more that tool chains can take that into account and can deliver the kinds of capabilities and features that are required. So a case in point, we're seeing a lot of interest around GitOps, which is a way of linking through from a Git-based repository at the starting point of the pipeline and underpinning the pipeline through the development and into operations, and then how can we bring that configuration information back into Git so that we're actually managing infrastructure and architectural and configuration data alongside code. Seeing a great deal of interest and growing interest in that. So that's the first one. The second area that we're seeing a growing interest in, and it's interest that's coming from all quarters, is low code. Now, low code is not a new thing. We've seen the use of non-programming mechanisms in order to deliver applications for years, if not decades. And some of the original low code vendors have been around for 10 years or more, original using the term low code. And it really depends how far back you want to go. I mean, do you go right back to 4GLs, for example, would be as far back as I can think, but I'm sure it goes even further back than that. But overall, we're seeing a huge interest in low code. It is a bit of a mixed bag. Low code can mean, for some organizations, it can mean citizen development, which is where people in the business, technically oriented people and less technical people, are actually going, wow, I can build an app. I can put something together at least to demonstrate what it was that was required. I guess if we think out loud, we did see this years ago when databases and things like Microsoft Access just popped into my head, where you could actually build. I can remember my boss, for example, the finance director, building his own database to store assets, and he was very proud of that. And we're seeing a similar phenomenon now, but across mobile apps, across enterprise apps, across cloud-based and software as a service apps. So yes, we've got that side of it. Equally, we're seeing low code as a way of helping develop things faster by the technical teams. So I've spoken to some organizations, and they're saying, well, why on earth, and this was an insurance example I'm thinking of, why on earth are we still building bespoke insurance applications? Surely that doesn't have to be rebuilt from scratch. And they're looking at the kind of platforms that low code brings. So if you want to bring out a new insurance product, you have standard components underneath. You have standard security, identity management, performance management, all that kind of stuff that any application is going to need. And all you've got to build is the front end, which is actually about the insurance product. And you can do it in a way that doesn't necessarily need a great deal of knowledge about coding and about making that stuff right. But speaking of making that stuff right, as I say here, it's all still code. And what we're finding from the interviews that we're doing is that, well, two things. The first is that low code is a kind of outsourcing. So you're actually outsourcing the capabilities that you don't want to build to a third party who happens to be a software vendor. It could be the OutSystems or Appian or TrackVia or any of the vendors in the low code space. And some organizations have said to us they actually see great benefit in having a relationship with the development teams at the vendor, because then they can see the roadmap, they can have feedback sessions, and so on and so forth. So this fact that it's low code doesn't mean that the provider of the platform suddenly vanishes. Actually, more access to that and more collaboration with the platform provider, the low code vendor, can be really, really helpful. And the other thing that we're hearing is that some of the good old principles of how to manage code still apply to low code. So things like configuration management, things like project management, things like value management. So last year I did a study around value stream management, which is all about really how can you ensure that the things that you're creating are going to be done in an efficient way, developed in an efficient way, delivered well, and then are actually going to be a source of value to your users, to your business. How can you measure that kind of thing? And it does link back into old school requirements management. So how can you stop yourself from just building any old stuff that sounds like a really snazzy idea, and actually be creating the things that your business needs in a way that your business needs it? So some of those really good old governance principles still apply to low code. Also using the word code, we've got infrastructure as code, which has been a growing phenomenon. We've seen this more and more. Everything as code has been used as a term, because if you can write something in a text file, that means you can then store it under configuration management. That means you can store it in parallel with code, etc., etc. And with infrastructure, with cloud-based infrastructures, with virtualized infrastructures, we've seen more and more the fact that you can define how it is that your application infrastructure should look, and then here's the principle: you bang a button and that infrastructure will be built for you automatically. And if it's not right, you can build it up. I heard this from a pharmaceutical company. They built an infrastructure, They started running it up for a research project. They realized it wasn't quite right. They didn't have enough memory. They tore it down. They reconfigured it. They put it back up again, and then they delivered the entire research project. And the punchline, this is back in the older days of cloud, the punchline was the whole thing cost $80. I remember that well. But infrastructure as code has had a diversification, and what we're seeing now is more of a consolidation. So rather than using multiple different ways of either specifying infrastructure or specifying how things are configured, and we've seen Puppet and Chef and Ansible and all kinds of other vendors that have been able to deliver those kind of recipes and formats and patterns and so on. We're seeing more and more people looking towards Terraform as what we can call an open standard for using for building infrastructure as code. So suddenly, can you do it in Terraform? Do we have anyone that knows Terraform, etc., etc.? It becoming more and more prevalent. And if we link that back to the first point that we're making here around distributed architectures, that does mean that we've got a situation where we've got more and more tangible, let's say microservices based for a start, but also serverless and so on, target architectures, and we've got a more and more tangible and fixed way of writing for those target architectures. So the result is we don't have to spend quite so much time thinking about either what the target architecture is going to look like or how to write it for that target architecture, which means we can spend more time on delivering innovative software. So that's all great, and also it means we get a better and more stronger skills mix, and we can all learn to deliver to those targets rather than having lots of different skills across the board, which aren't necessarily as easy to transfer. So that's a really important thing that's going to drive how we develop and deliver software in 2021 and beyond. Pipelines are really, really interesting. Now, back in the day, there was this thing called waterfall, and everyone followed the same sequence of steps. You developed requirements, you wrote a specification, you did a design, you wrote some code, and then we adapted it into a V-shaped thing. So you then test the code, and then you test the design, and then you test the requirements with user acceptance testing, and then you deliver. And the whole thing took 2 to 3 years. Rightly, a group of frustrated innovators said, hang on, we should be doing things far quicker than this. We should be doing things in months, not years. We should be doing things in weeks, not months. We should be doing things in days, not weeks. How about how many things can we do in a day? And that's been great. It's been really that whole movement towards a faster delivery of higher quality software has been fantastic. But it's come at a cost, and the cost has been what we could loosely call the governance layer. So right now, still it's the case that pipelines, so the series of steps and the tools that we use to support that series of steps, are fragmented. They may be multi-vendor. They're very often best of breed rather than some fixed vendor that's providing the whole lot, and that's causing problems of its own. And you don't want to spend your time, no organization wants to spend its time being the best pipeline manager in the world. You don't want to be spending your time dealing with fragmentation issues, dealing with the fact that review gates in that pipeline over there are different to the one in that pipeline over there, etc., etc. So a level of standardization is really, really helpful. And the good news is that vendors themselves, again, we're moving from a diversification, doing my hands there like that, moving from a diversification phase for pipelines and tooling into more of a consolidation phase. And we've seen this over the past few years, and we expect this to continue. There's companies that are pulling together tool sets. I'm thinking of CloudBees. I'm thinking of Digital.io that are pulling together what were fragmented tooling and are applying standardization to their own tool sets, which is great for the users of those tool sets. JFrog's another example. Organization pulling this kind of stuff together. We're seeing newer kids on the block like CodeFresh that do it all in one place. We've got GitLab, of course, just announced a partnership with IBM. So overall, we're seeing more and more of kind of a one-stop shop to go for your pipeline needs, which makes things super helpful. And if there's any advice to be had there, it should be all about the Pareto principle. We're not trying to block innovation. We don't want to go back to waterfall. We don't want to go back to restrictive practices that prevent people from actually creating new things. But neither do we want to spend all of our time managing the tool sets rather than actually getting on and doing the innovation. So as pipeline platforms consolidate and do become more manageable, that then also unlocks more time for innovation, which is a good thing. So finally, and it's a kind of wrap up home truth, within all of this, it's not that everyone's kind of already at the masterclass and looking to improve. We're seeing, as we look at organizations, that many are still struggling with the basics of what we can call automation, by which I mean just having something in place where you write code and then bang, it goes straight through to deployment with you having to do the minimum. So you can spend all of your time again on innovation and not on actually having to think about the platform itself. Getting automation better is a major thing that we can look to achieve in 2021. So how we can do that is by having more standardized pipelines for sure, having more standardized tool sets for sure, and then having a level of agreement around what it is that automation needs to bring. And things like value stream management, we can apply. So value stream management is essentially looking for bottlenecks in the development process, as I mentioned, looking for how we can make that more efficient, and then looking at how we can make the outputs of development more effective for the business. Sure, great. When we've identified those bottlenecks, then we can look at how we can apply automation to solve some of those bottlenecks. So why is the handoff between development and testing still such a manual process? Is a great question. Let's focus on that. Let's set up initiatives and collaboration in order to address that. And let's not try and solve all the problems at once, but let's just focus on a few priorities at a time that can ease the development process, remove friction, help developers get back into a position where they're focusing on development rather than doing all the manual effort that goes with development that's such a pain. And it does really go back right down to principles of throughput in manufacturing that were brought to life in Eli Goldratt's The Goal. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. And were kind of presented almost as an homage by the Phoenix Project, which is the classic of DevOps. So all of this is about throughput. All of this is about enabling the people, the innovators, the creative people that we have working across development, testing, user interface development, operations, etc. Security, very important as well. How we can get all of these people doing what it is that they're really good at and not spending their time building mud on their shoes as they're trying to get on with their jobs, because that's just slowing them down. It's making life less fun, and at the same time it's making delivery lower value. We're undermining our own ability to deliver. So let's not underestimate how much opportunity there still remains to look for points of friction in our development processes, to look for how we can still bring even basic continuous integration automation. It's not basic at all. There's the twist, and how we can automate some of that and bring in CI, bring in improvement in practices, bring in shift left security, but do it in such a way that we can actually make our lives better as we're doing it, rather than just locking everything down and making it more bureaucratic. So there we go. There's my predictions. I'm going to wrap up with just one nice to have, which isn't on the slide. But essentially it boils down to policy, and I'm seeing a lot of interest, and for some reason I'm feeling a kind of really warm feeling towards the notions of policy as code. So I mentioned infrastructure as code. You can also define the rules that you wish to abide by as code, and we're seeing this in the security sphere, and we're seeing this in infrastructure as code, and we're seeing it, for example, link the two, infrastructure as code, security. So you should be able to say, hey, nobody should be able to telnet into this application at any point. So you can write that down, you can document it once. And the great thing is, if you start thinking about policy first approaches to development and operations and so on, you can collaborate between developers, operations, security teams up front. You can be defining these things. You can agree that you've got to be compliant to PCI DSS in advance. You can lock that stuff down, and then you can get on with your lives, because it provides the basis for guardrails, which you can then measure. There are tools to help with this, to then enable you to see whether your code is fitting with the policy and so on, whether your infrastructure as code is fitting with the policy, whether you're starting to drift away from your policy requirements, and all of this can feed your development process up front. So it's kind of we use terms like shift left to say, why leave security later? And shift left to me is a stitch in time saves 9. Don't do the things late that you could have been doing earlier much more cheaply. And policy as code is essentially the manifestation. It's the realization of this whole idea of stitch in time. So we can be writing down what those stitches need to be collaboratively, and then we can be getting on with innovation. So that's my policy-based approaches, rather than shift left, be left approaches are what I'd love to see starting to come to fruition in 2021. If we can start to see the benefits of those things. I'm under no illusion that policy can become bureaucracy and can actually slow things down. So we've got to manage policy and keep that under control as well. But it's a great starting point. It's like the old Irish adage: if you want to get there, it's a great place to start in order to deliver on your innovation goals. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. And if you've got any questions at all, then please do find me on Twitter. I'm JONNO, Jono on Twitter. Get in touch with us at GigaOm. We'd love to speak to you. We'd love to hear your views about what you think about how development's going to go over the next year or so. And do stay in touch. Thank you very much.